today. I'm Tiffany Fortune. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Convert, and I'll be moderating today's session focused on a topic that impacts nearly every e-commerce brand, conversion optimization and website performance. We often hear brands talk about scaling traffic, increasing ad spend, or expanding marketing channels. But what's interesting and honestly surprising is that about 75% of eight-figure e-commerce brands aren't actively A/B testing their websites. And even among those who are, many struggle to turn testing into meaningful business results. Today, we're going to unpack what separates brands that test from brands that actually grow because of testing. We're joined by Anthony Morgan, founder and CEO from Inavi, who will walk us through optimization maturity, building a strategic CRO program, leveraging new Shopify features to drive measurable revenue impact. We'll also have time for Q&A, so please start thinking about questions as we go. Anthony, thank you for being here. Let's dive in.
Yeah, I'm so excited for this. I think this is the third part of kind of a series of webinars that we've done with you guys around CRO for Shopify stores. We've touched on a variety of things thus far, but today we're kind of going to, I guess, zoom out a little bit and talk about really the on-site performance as a growth lever, and the reality that 75% of Shopify, eight-figure Shopify stores are not A/B testing. And so there is a lot of good data that we're going to dive in today. And so I'm going to do a brief introduction on myself. If you're not familiar with who I am or who we are at Inavi, we are a CRO agency. That's all we do. And we work predominantly with Shopify stores, 8 and 9-figure industry-leading brands. Our approach to CRO is what we call human obsessed. And so we really try to get into the mind of the customer and understand why they buy, why they don't buy, and leverage that to not only improve your on-site performance, but also improve your business as a whole. There's so many of these learnings that can be transformative to how you're thinking about marketing, how you're thinking about the future roadmap of the business. And so today we're really going to narrow in on kind of this 8-figure set of Shopify stores, and some of the problems they're experiencing and how on-site performance can be a growth lever that is often ignored and very often neglected. And so give you some real practical ways to actually leverage that as a growth lever. And so kind of the outline here is we're going to touch on the problem here first, which you don't see, but we're going to get into that in a minute. And then we're going to help you kind of figure out where you're at on the levels of on-site maturity in terms of how you're approaching improving the on-site experience and performance. Allow yourself to kind of self-diagnose, okay, where do I sit in these 3 different stages? And then we're going to talk about what it looks like to ultimately elevate what you're doing and move into a strategic CRO process and give you some tools to start doing that. We're going to touch briefly on Shopify's new CRO features and talk through how those can be leveraged, our kind of thoughts and approach with them at Inavi. And then we'll have a little bit of a giveaway at the end for those 8-figure stores that are attending. So a couple of housekeeping things here. This is being recorded, so you'll have the ability to watch this over again. Or if you've got to leave and go somewhere else, you can come back and watch the recording. We also have some time carved out at the end for Q&A. And so if there are any questions that you have or comments, feel free at any point to drop those into Zoom, into LinkedIn, and we'll make sure that those questions get surfaced up during the Q&A time. So here we go. Let's get into this. I'm super excited for this. And so I want to paint a really clear picture of the problems that brands are experiencing. And we're talking about 8-figure brands and really focusing in on this set of brands between like 10, 25, and 50 million, the problems that they're experiencing. And so the truth is, at some point in time during your evolution and the growth of your e-commerce brand, you're going to experience your on-site performance, your online store, ultimately becoming an anchor and slowing progress. For some brands, they can get to 10 million, they can get to 20, 25, 30 million. Product market fit can do some wonderful things, but at some point in time, no amount of great marketing and even a great product, for instance, can outwork a poor post-click experience. And so at some point in time, that anchor is going to start dragging on the bottom, slowing you down. You might not be experiencing it now, but there are some underlying problems that exist that, though Facebook and Meta ads are performing great, if those shift at all, you're going to feel the ramifications of your on-site performance in the areas that it's lagging. Though right now, it's not hindering growth in the way that you're actually visibly seeing it, you will experience it at some point in time. So it's only a matter of time, and it's going to be an anchor to your progress. The second problem here is that ads are only getting more expensive. Like if you go back to 2016, funny thing, back in the day, like I was in-house at a brand, I was doing ads up until 2020, and I experienced like the heyday of Facebook. It wasn't even Meta at this point, being really easy. It was like easy mode. I could throw up an ad for a pair of board shorts. Wasn't even a great ad. The post-click experience was terrible, but it was good enough that it didn't have a bunch of friction to slow the user down, and the ads would just crush. Like really good ROAS, customer acquisition costs were low. Like it was cheap. The reality is every day ads are getting more expensive, right? The truth is ads will never be cheaper than they are today. And so this means that every day, if you aren't mitigating against the reality that ad costs are rising, your margins will be eroding. And so if your ad costs are rising, your margins are eroding, and you're not doing anything to improve the post-click experience, your conversion rate, you'll be lucky if your conversion rate is flat, as this chart indicates, right? For most brands that we see that haven't touched their on-site performance, that start experiencing that slowing down their progress, their conversion rate starts to slow down, right? It starts to decline. And so that's not a good combo for profitable growth. The third problem here is so much is invested pre-click, so much time, so much resources, so much money. It's expensive to run ads. Most 8-figure Shopify stores are investing $250K plus on ads over the course of a month. And that's a low number for many brands. And so there's a lot of effort that's put towards acquiring traffic, whether that's through creative testing, the actual production of the creative. And so that's where most of the time ultimately gets put for brands. And it's kind of paid ads over everything. And that's not a bad thing. There needs to be effort towards that. The pre-click experience is important. Creative testing is important. That's how Meta targets the user for you nowadays, is based off of your creative. You have to have really good creative to stand out in social media, right? And so these aren't bad things, but the problem is that's where most of the effort ends up getting put, and there's nothing really put towards the post-click experience. And then the other problem is you're wearing too many hats, just one too many hats, right? So I was in-house and I've experienced this. Like I totally get what it's like to have to try to take care of all of these different things. Like I recently got the Slack message of a head of digital commerce role from a brand that we actively work with, and what they're looking for in terms of the job description, right? And we've got website merchandising and CRO, email and SMS, paid media strategy, creative direction, D2C business ownership for not just one brand, but 2 brands. And so there's a lot of hats that are having to be worn here for an e-com operator that's working with a brand that's doing $10 to $50 million a year. You don't have all of these different roles to help support you with many of these activities. And even if it is an agency that's executing on it, it's still pulling for your time. And so oftentimes what gets neglected as a result is the on-site performance, right? And performance is going to degrade over time. And the only warning sign you have is Shopify conversion rate, because you're not measuring it properly too, right? Which we're going to touch into that too. That's going to be part of the process, is understanding performance and how to measure that well is key. And so those are some of the problems, right? And what happens is brands start looking for solutions. And where most think solutions exist is more ad creative, more paid channels. We need to diversify our paid. We can't be solely into Meta and Google. We need to get into TikTok and Pinterest and Snapchat and whatever other channels that exist out there, or we need to expand our catalog, we need more products, or we need a better brand. And these are not bad things. There's a time and a place for many of these things, but oftentimes they're the wrong lever. If you've ever seen Emperor's New Groove, there's this scene here of Kronk, and he pulls the wrong lever. And so I thought this was a perfect indicator because oftentimes the wrong lever gets pulled. And typically it's usually because there's things that much larger brands are doing or competitors are doing that maybe is working for them. It might not be working for them, that we see them doing. You're like, hey, we need to do that. But that might not be the right place and time for you to do that. And you end up pulling the wrong lever. And at the bottom of this list is so often improving the site. And rarely is it done with the right approach. And so the reality is, what if it's less about having more of anything, having more traffic, more creative, more products, and it's more about doing more with the same? And so you hear this kind of saying probably often, but same ad spend equals same traffic equals more revenue, kind of this idea around doing conversion rate. But that reality can be true. The good news is that does exist, right? It is entirely possible to be proactive about improving your on-site performance and not have to be spending way more on traffic to hit your revenue targets, right? You can turn your on-site performance, your online store, into a growth lever where it transforms from being an anchor that's slowing your growth to something that's actually helping you grow, and it's compounding your ad spend. And so imagine that, right? Adding another dimension to your growth efforts, right? Instead of just having to think about how do we get more traffic or retention, you've got this additional dimension with your on-site performance and how that can become a growth lever for you. And so the best way to get started, that's the question that everybody's asking. Okay, so what do I do? I think the best place to really start is to be realistic with where you're currently at. And so that's where we're going to go in, and we're going to kind of self-diagnose based off of these 3 different buckets that we believe kind of 99% of Shopify stores kind of exist within. And that's going to be kind of the starting point to understanding, okay, where am I at? And then we'll talk through what it actually looks like to level up your CRO efforts in 2026. So the 3 levels of maturity with your on-site experience. The first level here is where 74% of Shopify stores exist. And this data point sounds like a massively high number. Sounds like we just pulled that out of thin air, but we didn't. This is based off of store leads data for brands doing 8 figures annually on Shopify. 74.52% of 8-figure stores do not have an A/B testing tool installed. And so these brands are operating off of gut feelings. They're doing redesigns. There's maybe even their efforts towards the on-site experience is pretty stagnant. They're not doing anything to improve that. And so most of the attention gets paid towards other things like your paid efforts. And then the only time that really gets put towards the on-site experience is when the conversion rate starts to dip. And you see that in your Shopify dashboard. And the CEO or a key stakeholder is like, hey, what's going on here? We need to fix this. We're looking at, 7, 14 days or, a few days of conversion rate dipping. And so this is the vast majority of brands. They're operating within this. They don't have a clear understanding of site performance. There's no A/B testing tool installed, right, to help understand what changes are ultimately helping or hurting performance. And when performance suffers, it's not something that's actually attacked with the progress or with a clear process, right? The approach is typically to go towards like best practices or what are my competitors doing, or hey, the site's stale, we need to do a redesign. And so those are some of the different challenges, the actions that are taken in this process. And so when we're thinking about these redesigns, they're extremely costly, right? Like minimum, you're spending probably $30K. Sure, you can get some that are less than that, but the vast majority of brands are upwards of 75, 100, 150K plus that they're spending on a redesign. And oftentimes this is happening like every few years. I know some brands that operate like kind of on a 2-year cadence of doing redesigns. Or you're chasing shiny objects and looking at new technologies to help fix problems. And all that leads to is bloat, right? Not only bloat on your P&L, but also on your site, performance and speed. And the truth is, the changes that you are implementing directly to your theme, probably 9 out of 10 of them aren't making a difference. And some of those are actually detrimental to performance. Like Google has a case study around this, and it's like 10%, which is extremely low. And so that's where you're at if you're just operating off of gut feelings and redesigns. I don't know how many of you can kind of relate to that or would say, hey, I'm in that bucket where we have not done anything to really improve our on-site performance. It's pretty stagnant, or we just opt to doing redesigns every couple years because it makes the founder feel good. The level 2, which this is a good step in the right direction, it's a good starting point, I would say, is this idea of self-service A/B testing. And this is 18% of Shopify stores. And this is a rough estimate, to be honest. We're talking about the 25% of stores that do have an A/B testing tool installed. Whenever we're talking to those brands that do have a tool installed, it's roughly about like 2/3 or so of those that haven't really worked with a CRO agency that's bringing in a strategic process to CRO. And so that's where this 18% number comes out. And so these are brands that maybe they're dabbling in testing. They might be working with their dev and design agency and doing some A/B testing. But it's oftentimes very tactical testing that's not really moving the needle and making an impact. And so it's kind of scattered across a lot of different efforts. This idea of spaghetti testing, where you're just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. That's not really CRO. Rarely does that produce long-term wins and long-term sustainable growth. And oftentimes when we see these kind of handled and led by development agencies, most only stay very foundational. So when we're looking at this kind of pyramid where we've got functional, accessible, usable, intuitive, and persuasive, the vast majority of the efforts kind of stay at the bottom of this pyramid. It's really the bottom of the foundational kind of parts of your on-site performance. It never really moves beyond into the more mature areas where you're creating a more intuitive experience, a more persuasive experience. And so along with this is a variety of things that ultimately lead to the test results being questionable, false positives all around, and just not a whole lot of learnings and meaningful impact that's ultimately impacting core business objectives. And really supporting the business and where it's trying to go. The third level here is what we call strategic CRO. We have this as 7%, right? Roughly a third or so, a little less than a third or so of the stores that do have an A/B testing tool installed. This is where CRO truly becomes a growth lever. One of the things that you'll see throughout this as we go through the presentation is you'll see like little artifacts of our CRO process and some of the documents that we use within our client portal to really push forward a strategic process. And so rather than chasing best practices, you're proactively attacking the site and the customer problems that are negatively impacting performance, the business problems that are negatively impacting performance. And as a result, you start to see testing as a means of research more than just a means of validating whether you've made an impact or not. And you start to move into the strategic process that we're going to talk about here in a minute. And so it's really easy when you're operating within this strategic CRO process to resist the urge to chase shiny objects because you're narrowed in and focused on the biggest problems that are in front of you. It's not perfect by any means. Those shiny objects pop up and it's easy to shift your eyes and want to go over there, but you come narrow back to the data and what the data is telling you. And that's what really helps you shift from we have to test everything to we want to test as many important things as we can. the most important things. Like, what are real problems that we need to solve through our A/B testing, our experimentation kind of process? And so when we think about the actions kind of taken in this, there's really three main areas that we're going to go in a little bit deeper when we talk about the strategic CRO process. The first one is you're identifying the site's biggest opportunities based on the inter-site funnel. We're going to talk through that here and really dive into some data so you can understand how impactful it is. And then maximizing every A/B test idea and result with the 3I iteration loop. And then the last thing, validating customer findings that can then be used beyond the on-site. This is a big next step that can be really difficult to unlock, but so much of the research and the learnings that you're uncovering through a strategic CRO process can be leveraged beyond just the on-site experience, right? It can impact your ads, it can impact your emails, it can transform the way that you're thinking about the business. And so this is a really good step in the right direction. However, this isn't the ultimate end goal of where you should be, right? I said there was three buckets. There's a fourth bucket, and this is like less than 1% of Shopify stores. And this is this idea of growth experimentation. When you're thinking about A/B testing, you're thinking about experiments that transform the business, not just improve the on-site experience. You're expanding profit margins in a stable market. You're defending against an increasingly competitive market, right? What is our moat? What differentiates us? You're expanding your catalog safely, your product strategies safely. You're mitigating against oftentimes the risks that can happen in doing that. But your tests become not less about on-site performance, but they become about on-site performance, on-site optimization, and business optimization. You add in this layer of optimizing the business, and that's growth experimentation. Very few brands touch this. This is where you ideally want to get, but we're going to focus in on level 3 because most aren't going to get here. And there's a lot that we could talk through on growth experimentation too. But I think the important thing is first getting to that strategic CRO process. And so whether you're in level 1 with 74% of brands relying on gut feelings and redesigns, maybe have a pretty stagnant site that hasn't been changed very often, or you're in level 2, you can make it to level 3. You don't have to go level 1 to level 2 to level 3. And so you can jump quickly to level 3 with a clear process, with a clear approach. And so that's what we're going to give you today is kind of a clear process and approach to strategic CRO. So you can move beyond relying on gut feelings, where you have no idea what is ultimately impacting performance, or you're just kind of testing to test random ideas and you just don't feel like that's actually producing any meaningful results. We're going to show you a way that ultimately will turn your on-site performance into a growth lever, right? And this is the thing that most brands are neglecting. So part 2 here is breaking down strategic CRO. We're going to break it down into 3 kind of different steps. The first step is moving beyond conversion rate. Instead of using conversion rate as your primary metric, we recommend using the inter-site funnel as your entry point to CRO. And so when we think about conversion rate, it's extremely deceiving, right? So your conversion rate is probably 90% plus of the time impacted more by things outside of the on-site experience than it is by changes that you make to the site. What I mean is when you increase ad spend and you start driving more cold meta traffic, or you launch a new campaign even, or you have an email campaign sent, or you start sending more email and you start driving more revenue from retention efforts, your performance is going to shift and you did nothing to your on-site experience. Your conversion rate is going to increase or it's going to decrease, oftentimes by those types of variables when we're thinking about traffic quality. There's many other variables like seasonality, like the market, your competitors, that can impact conversion rate far more than anything you do on the on-site experience. And so that's where we need to move a layer deeper and really understand what ultimately makes up conversion rate, what leads to a conversion. And so that's why we have the 4 key behaviors within the insight funnel. And so this first behavior here is landing to product view. And so this is the percentage of users that land on the site and view a product. Our target here is 50 to 70%. And so if you have a user that lands on the homepage, we want 50% of those to advance to view a product. If you have users that land on the collection page, we want 50% of those or 70% of those to advance to view a product. That's the target range. This is based off of our internal data set of hundreds of stores where we've kind of set up these baseline ranges of where you should target to be. And this product discovery issue is a massive issue. A lot of brands will focus efforts on the product page. Their catalogs will expand, so their navigation gets much larger. Their homepage will shift and change. It can be very political to push forward changes on the homepage. And oftentimes, product discovery is the one that is performing the worst. For like 94% of brands within our insight funnel benchmark report, we're underperforming on one of kind of the underlying landing to product view segments. So homepage LP to product view or collection page LP to product view. They were underperforming there. They were underneath that 50% target. It's a pretty big problem that we see, and most brands don't know how to like proactively address it. The second step that we see in the insight funnel is product view to add to cart, right? The percentage of users that view a product that ultimately add to cart. Our target range here is 12 to 18%. This is the second problem that we see that most commonly. There's a lot of traffic driven to product pages from your paid ad efforts. There's traffic that's just coming from a variety of different sources with a variety of different intention and awareness, right? And the product page isn't speaking well to those. And oftentimes it's not speaking well to those colder users. And as a result, you're underperforming. The other two metrics are add to cart to begin checkout and begin checkout to purchase. Begin checkout to purchase is one that we see as the least common issue. Most of the time, if it is an issue, it's because you have quite a bit of traffic from different countries. You have to deal with some logistical stuff with taxes, duty, and shipping costs that ultimately cause this to underperform. But the vast majority of Shopify stores are actually fine here with begin checkout to purchase, right? And so one of our goals is with the insight funnel to give you a clear focus and priority. And so we don't, the goal isn't just to like pat yourself on the back and be like, oh, hey, we're doing great on product view to add to cart. No, the goal is to say, okay, this is where we're going to focus efforts. We're struggling on landing the product view. And so when we go over here into step one in this example, where we're looking at the master list, this is a brand that we've been working with for a while now, and this is their initial insight funnel report. I think this is actually from like over 2 years ago. We've since have slightly restyled our insight funnel report, so it's a little bit more pleasing to the eye. But the idea here is we're taking those 4 key steps in the insight funnel. So landing to product view, PDP to cart, cart to checkout, checkout to purchase, and then breaking those down by different segments. So we've got device category, we've got landing page, we've got channel grouping, we've got new versus returning, US users versus non-US users, and then we can see the percentage of users that are ultimately impacted by, or the percentage of users that make up this segment. And so a key one to look at for this brand is they've got nearly 70% of users coming via mobile and only 5.22% of those adding to cart once they view a product. That's well underneath the target of 12%, and it's drastically different than desktop performance. Desktop is 12.6% are adding to cart. That's actually above the target. It's performing at like half the rate that desktop is. And then when we look here at this next one, we can see users that land on the product page, which makes up about 27.5% of users. Only 3.4% of those are adding to cart after viewing a product. And the vast majority of that traffic is actually coming from paid, which makes up 45% of the total traffic, and only 5% of those are adding to cart. That's a big problem. Whether they're experiencing this whether they were experiencing this before in terms of that hindering growth, they were going to experience that at one time, at some point in time, right? So as ad costs rise, this problem that they're experiencing with their on-site performance is only going to get worse, right? It's only going to get more magnified. That anchor is going to slow you down. And so this was the area that we really focused in on for them is we've got to improve product view to add to cart for users that land on the product page, predominantly looking at their mobile experience. And so the second thing is now that we have a clear focus, we understand our performance, we have a framework with the insight funnel to actually measure and look at performance. We're not just looking at Shopify's conversion rate or Shopify's very basic purchase journey. We're going layers deeper by using what's available within Google Analytics to really understand how users are navigating through our site, where we should be focusing efforts. And so the next step is to turn that into ultimately insights and then implementation and interpretation. And so you need to learn how to learn from testing, right? So we know that, okay, we've got to improve our product page for mobile users. And we're going to validate that we're making an impact through testing, but we're also going to learn through that process too, right? The idea is that when you have a test idea, let's just go really basic here. Let's say, hey, we've got a lot of content on our product page, a lot of traffic from mobile. Let's add a sticky add to cart. This is a very basic idea, but everybody can relate to it. They understand it. They've probably done a test like this before. So you're going to run this as a test, right? And the goal is at the end of that test, you're able to interpret, was this impactful? Was this not impactful? What did we learn about the customer in the process? And how can we iterate on it? It's not just a line where you run this sticky add to cart A/B test, and then you stop doing anything from that. You continue to learn from that test and you turn that back into more insights, right? And so one of the key things for this brand that we worked with, which they sell frames for TVs, like your Samsung TV frame, is users were really struggling to understand like how it looked in their space. Did it fit the style they're looking for? And so through the process of trying to improve that problem, right? That's a core customer problem. We're using this loop, right? This 3i iteration loop where we're taking this insight of, hey, here's a core problem. This is a friction point that customers have. They don't quite know how the product's going to look in their space, if it fits their style. And so we're then saying, okay, what's a potential solution for that? We tested like a 3D viewer or augmented reality where they could see it in their space. That didn't work. Like it didn't actually have a positive impact on performance. And that actually existed pre us. We came in and actually tested removing that and realized, hey, this isn't actually helping with providing a solution to this problem. There's got to be a better way for us to address that. And so we're just going through this loop, trying to solve this one customer problem. And that's where you start to make an impact, right? That was a big problem. There's multiple ways that we had to attack this. It wasn't just one test that ultimately fixed the problem. Many times there's multiple ways that you have to address a customer problem. And then the last step is that 90 days of focus. We've got another artifact here with the 90-day growth plan. Our approach to CRO is we take that insight funnel metric on fire. Their metric on fire was product landing page to add to cart. So users are landing on the product page, but they're not adding to cart at the rate that we'd like. It's predominantly coming from paid. And so we build out this focus over a 90-day period to really try to understand what are the problems, what's causing, why is this happening? Like, why is there this fire here on product view to add to cart for users that land on the product page? And that's where we come up with those customer problems that we ultimately need to solve and then validate that we're making a difference through A/B testing. And this 90-day kind of framework creates that focus. Like, hey, we're focusing in here. And then at the end of the 90 days, we have some clear metrics where we've got, these are the baselines. This is what we're trying to target. And we're then reevaluating, like, did we make a difference? Is there more opportunity to press forward on this metric on fire? Should we put another 90 days towards it? Or should we reevaluate and look towards another problem? Is there another issue that's popped up? But this 90 days of focus is really important. And that's where that first step and the third step come together, where the intrasite funnel is meant to give you a clear focus and priorities and a way to measure on-site performance, and not be scattered across a bunch of different efforts. And then you pair that with this 90-day growth plan structure, and you're hyper-focused, going a mile deep into a problem and actually making an impact instead of being spread a mile wide and only going an inch deep and not really making an impact. So we're going to recap this real example here. When we used their intrasite funnel, we could see that PDP to ad cart rate was the issue. That was 56% below the target. On mobile, it was 71% below the target of 12%. Their other segments were actually performing just fine. This is where we needed to really focus efforts. And so we dove deep on that through a variety of different research methods, surveys, polls, review mining. A lot of that qualitative research is where the gold is at. That's where you can really understand, why is this happening? What are customers saying about the friction that they're experiencing as they go through the buying process? And that's what gives us the ideas, right? So we know these are problems. Here's some ideas that we could use to potentially solve this problem. And that's what turns into an A/B test, right? A hypothesis that, hey, we've got this problem where users, they don't quite know what the product's going to look like in their space. How can we help support them in that? And then that last step, where we're really focusing in on that core problem, on that metric on fire for 90 days. And in the case of this one, there was a 25% lift in average revenue per user when we focused in on this problem over 90 days. And when we look at over 2 years of working with this brand, average revenue per user is up 49%, and monthly revenue has doubled. So not only is traffic up, but also average revenue per user is up. Revenue has doubled. They've systematically improved their site every 90 days. And so again, you reevaluate at the end of that 90 days. Should we focus on this problem some more? Is there more juice to squeeze, or should we move elsewhere? So the last thing I want to touch on here is, it's been a little bit of a hot topic with Shopify's winter edition, their Renaissance edition. They had a couple of CRO features, and I say CRO with parentheses there, because there are some things that these could probably be used, and there are some use cases for them. And so I want to talk through them, and some of these we actually put to the test, and we'll talk about the results that we had as a result, and then a quick little takeaway for you guys. And so the first thing was Shopify's rollouts. So the idea here is that brands can test one theme versus another. They can roll it out without avoiding having really detrimental performance. This feature is not available for everybody. We hadn't had a chance to test it out yet. My suspicion, and what I know in what I've read about kind of documentation about it, is that it's going to be very basic. Or think like Shopify's email and SMS tools, or any tools that Shopify kind of implements within their platform. It's just kind of raises the floor on what the Shopify apps and the ecosystem have to do. It's very foundational. I would assume it's not going to go deep on metrics. You're probably not going to be able to pipe this data into GA4. There's going to be a lot of things that are just not going to be valuable or reliable for a brand that's trying to do strategic CRO. If you're an 8-figure brand. There's some smaller brands where you're not like actively doing a lot of A/B testing, where using a rollouts feature like this could make sense. But again, I don't think it's going to be something that is going to be widely utilized. The next one is SimGym. And this is the one that I would say has probably been the most talked about. And it's this idea of synthetic users, or synthetic QA. And so if you don't know about it, really what it is there's going to be these AI shoppers trained on Shopify's data. So the plethora of data that Shopify has, and that will ultimately be used to stress test your store before you launch any changes. This has been around for a long time. There are plenty of other products that use synthetic users. Shopify is by no means first to do this. Uh, and what we did is we actually put this to the test. We did a series of kind of user tests or A/B tests to compare SimGym's results to actual A/B tests that we ran with real users. The results were very mixed. There were some results that aligned or were close, or at least directionally on the same kind of page as our A/B tests. And then there were some that were actually off. They were the complete opposite results. One thing that we did notice in this is SimGym really prefers low clutter, fast path to add to cart. So like everything it's thinking about is like less steps, less steps. Whereas in our experience, real shoppers benefit more from like having clarity through the process, even if there is additional steps added or additional depth added. But SimGym kind of defaulted in a lot of its tests towards what's the like lowest clutter, fastest path to add to cart. And so we can see some of that here in this little call out from a result that SimGym had, where it's, the variant reduced friction in list to product navigation and presented clear paths to add to cart, which boosted versus the control. There's a lot of the language that Oli uses like clear paths to add to cart, less clutter. It's thinking a lot through that lens. And so I think there is still some value in SimGym from at least a directional pre-check, especially if you're a smaller store and you don't have the luxury of traffic. It can help validate some decisions to a point, but it's by no means perfect. It's not by no means a replica of what an actual A/B test result is going to be. And it very often stays foundational. When we go back to that pyramid, and we're thinking about the different kind of elements of CRO and on-site performance, it's going to stay more in that functional, accessible, usable area, the foundational area. And it's not going to move quite as much into the intuitive and persuasive area. It doesn't quite grasp those in our experience thus far. And so our take when it comes to these tools, or really any tools, is there are no shortcuts in CRO. And tools are not strategy. Tools are not a replacement for strategy. You need a clear strategy to be able to actually turn your on-site performance into a growth lever. And so this is a big thing that I'm going to continue to preach. There are so many tools out there that can help you in a variety of different ways and can enable you to move faster and there's lots of benefits to that. But the reality is a tool is never a replacement for a clear strategy. And more than ever, you need a clear strategic approach to your CRO process to really turn that into a growth lever. So the last part here is a giveaway that we're doing. And so we're going to be giving away our conversion audit. In our conversion audit, we're going to be going through the inter-site funnel. This audit is 30 pages where we're dial in, focus in on your real data. So we'll get access to your GA4. We'll take a look at your inter-site funnel, how that performs, try to understand why that's happening, go through some root cause analysis, what's potentially causing this metric on fire. And so you're going to see your data in a way that you've never seen it before. The vast majority of brands that we go through this with are absolutely wowed by what they see and things that they didn't realize that were problems. You're going to see your master list, so that segmentation, that context to really understand how your site's performing across different segments. Those key findings, right, to understand what's potentially causing the metric on fire, where we look at the data and pair it with your on-site experience. And then some test concepts. Here are 5 to 7 test concepts that can be used to solve this problem. And these are concepts like, there's a chance that 20-30% of these win. And as you actually take it into your process, these concepts, they're going to shift and change. The actual idea is just like, hey, this is one way that we think you could solve this problem. But the actual content, the copy, can very much be impacted by research that you're doing to refine and make that test concept even more impactful. But it was important for us that we pair that with how we're thinking about CRO, how we're thinking about actually solving the problems that we're seeing in your inter-site funnel data. And then the last thing is the revenue impact. A lot of reasons why brands don't push forward with CRO is because they don't believe it's actually going to make a revenue impact, or in their experience, they don't think it's going to make a revenue impact. And so that is far from the truth. There is substantial opportunity for the vast majority of brands, as we've seen today in the data, to turn their on-site performance into a growth lever. And we like to kind of pair our audit with the impact of CRO, kind of quantify the impact. If we took your metric on fire and improved it by 10, 15%, which is traditionally what we'll see over the course of 90 days, what would that mean to revenue? And what would that look like on a monthly revenue gain? And so that's an important component because ROI is crucial. Every dollar counts in ecom, and you need to invest it well. And the ROI that you get from CRO compounds. It has a massive impact, not only on your on-site experience, but on your paid marketing efforts too. And then the last little bonus here is part of this quarter, we've been doing 12-month roadmaps with our conversion audits. And so as a bonus, you'll get a 12-month roadmap that will talk through what your 90-day kind of growth plans would look like throughout the next 4 quarters, based off of what we see in the data, based off of what we learn in our kind of discovery process with you. And then you can take this audit, you can take this roadmap and run with it. Whether it makes sense for you to work with us or not, you're going to have these takeaway documents to go and turn your on-site performance into a growth lever. Instead of sitting stagnant, instead of relying on redesigns, you can actually be proactive. And so this is an exclusive offer for any 8-figure Shopify stores attending. We're only giving away 5 of these. We typically charge $2,500 for these. The impact is far more than just $2,500. This is a step in that right direction of taking the step to turn, go from a level 1 or a level 2 to strategic CRO and level 3, and really mature your efforts in a way that's going to impact your business substantially. And so there's a QR code here, or you can go to go.enavi.co/audit-giveaway to fill out a little form there and schedule a call with me to enter into the giveaway. We're giving this away to 5 brands. Last day to register is this Friday. So you need to be in by midnight Eastern time on Friday to be a part of this giveaway. And so now let's move over to a Q&A. I'm not sure what we've had come through in terms of questions, whether on LinkedIn or Zoom, but I'd love to answer any questions that you guys do have.
Thank you, Anthony. Taking a look at the questions here, I will go ahead and ask one as we populate a few others up here. One moment. So the first question, what do you say to people that think doing CRO turns your site into feeling gimmicky or like a casino?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a real stigma that many have about CRO. And it's typically based in, I would say, misconceptions, or if we're honest, the typical CRO that we can often see in the e-com space or the Shopify space, where it gets extremely tactical, where it's very surface level. We're just thinking about, hey, okay, we need to add scarcity elements. Let's add a thing that says, 8 items left in stock, or a countdown timer. Oftentimes, that's what people see CRO as. But really, what CRO is solving real customer problems or real business problems through a clear process, where you're looking at the data and you're using your data and your research to understand what is the problem, why is this happening, and then you're ideating solutions based off of what you've learned in the data, and then you're testing, right? You're using tests as a further research method to validate that you're making an impact. And when you go through this process, you're not just adding a bunch of gimmicky things like Tom from West Virginia bought 2 hours ago. That's not sure, can those things make an impact? Yes. But the reality is that does turn your site into something that looks really gimmicky and is oftentimes a turn off and can have a negative impact on brand too. And so it's mostly derived from just a poor understanding of what CRO is, which unfortunately in the Shopify space, we haven't done the best job of being clear on what real CRO is, what real strategic CRO is.
Mm-hmm. So another question, this is just for me based on what you've presented today, and I really appreciate it. This was a great presentation. But when you're working with your with customers, I'm curious, like what team structure do you find really supports strong optimization programs? Like, what's the makeup? Do you see that's usually successful in really this level of strategy?
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing I would say is, and this was like the third or the fourth bullet point on what strategic CRO looks like in action, is this idea of not having your efforts siloed to just the on-site experience.
Hmm.
And so CRO is predominantly going to be working with the ecom team, whatever that looks like, those that are owning the on-site experience, merchandising, those different elements that make up your online store. But the learnings that come out of the process of doing CRO can and should impact more than just the on-site experience. And so that's where having, at least quarterly calls with your growth team, the team that's owning paid, whether that's agency or that's in-house, having those conversations where you're sharing learnings, not just on site saying, hey, here's what we learned, here's some ideas on how we think you could experiment with this, but on the other side, growth saying like, hey, here's what we're learning in creative testing, here's what we've learned about the customer, here's the problems that we're experiencing. That's the big thing. And most brands really struggle to crack that, whether
Hmm.
that's because they've got agencies and it's all siloed, or they're a much larger brand that's nine figures and has different departments that aren't really talking to each other. If you can crack that, that's where you can have a really significant impact on more than just the on-site experience with your CRO efforts.
All right, thank you. And we have another question here, so I'm just going to read this one. Just a quick question regarding intra-site funnels. Since the funnel is grouped by landing page and blended on event ratios, how do we know these percentages reflect actual sequential progression?
Yeah, let me read that one again. Since this funnel is grouped by
Yeah.
page. For example, how do we confirm that a user who landed on the homepage actually moved to a product page in order, rather than just being part of a session that also triggered a PDB event somewhere? I mean, the reality is you're using event data in GA4, and so there is some nuance to the intra-site funnel, right? Just because somebody lands on the home page doesn't mean that their next step was going to the product page if they completed a product view. They may have gone to search, they may have gone to a collection, and then maybe they finally got to a product page. So yeah, there definitely is some micro steps that can happen within the intra-site funnel. But the core idea is we want to get more users to advance down the funnel. And so that's where homepage LP to product view rate is just looking at that from an event standpoint. How many of those users actually viewed a product? In your research, you can go layers deeper and understand the page path that happens when a user lands on the homepage. What's the next step that they take, and map that out to try to understand where exactly is the further bottleneck on product discovery and landing to product view.
Okay. And then I think they had a follow-up to that as well. Oh, he said, thanks for confirming. So I think you got it there. There you go, Anthony. That's awesome.
Okay, cool.
Um, and so one of the other questions that we have is, can CRO and brand coexist?
Yeah. Actually had a conversation with a brand earlier that is very has a very particular kind of look and feel that they want to have communicated in everything they do, not just their on-site experience. And so this is a common concern where it's like the it's really rooted in that first question that was asked, right? That misconception that CRO is going to turn your site into a casino, right? You're going to have, or just a very like gimmicky feeling site. Um, and that obviously would be detrimental to brand in many ways. And so I think there is a world where both of those, both CRO and brand, can exist because you're trying to solve the same problems, and you're actually can be um, sharing learnings with each other, right? And CRO can actually be positively influencing brand and not negatively having an impact, right? Because you're learning about the customer, you're learning about business problems. And CRO can be done in a way that actually further elevates brand and doesn't take away from brand. But this is a pretty big issue that we have with brands, especially those that are kind of like in the luxury space. They're like really concerned with the negative impact that CRO could have on brand. Um, but they can coexist. You can do it well without having a negative impact.
Wonderful. Okay, see if we've got one. We have time up. We have another question here. Also, do you think with introduction of UCP CRO will be more agentic conversion optimization? And for that, product data will play a key role rather than the visual UI UX.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think the if you don't understand fully what that one's saying, anybody that's listening, is the idea of um, agentic commerce, where you're purchasing ultimately through AI and you're not actually visiting the website. I think one thing I will say is I think that there's going to be more of that used over time, and over years we'll see that start to have an impact. I don't think that in 5 years 75% of online purchases are going to be through agentic commerce. I don't think that's going to happen. Do I think we could be at like 5, 10, 15% over the next 5, 10 years? Sure, for sure. And I think there's value in pressing into that. But I think one of the beautiful things is if you have a clear CRO process, where you're actually trying to understand more about the customer and the problems that they're experiencing, right? The friction that they're experiencing in the buying process, the things that motivate them, or go to jobs to be done, like why are they hiring the product? What's the job that they're hiring it for? If you're doing those things, you can start feeding your site or feeding AI ultimately with really good content about the problems that your product solves, the customers that your product is for. And that data becomes very important. And that's where if you're just sitting on the foundational stuff of CRO and what makes up on-site performance with functionality, accessibility, and usability, you're missing a big part of that, the intuitive and persuasive experience that you can then use that to feed the product data, to feed the AI and what they know about you. And so I think there's definitely going to be continue to be increased value in translating customer knowledge into meaningful content on your site that not only impacts the users that visit your site, but is also fed into AI. And as a result, you're coming up more commonly recommended because you're speaking clearly to a problem that customers need solved.
Mhm. Yes, wonderful. Well, we're at time, so thank you so much. I just want to say thank you, Anthony, for sharing your expertise today. This was really fabulous. Thank you to everyone who joined and participated. Be sure to stay connected with Anavi and take advantage of the resources shared today. So hopefully you had a chance. We can maybe go back to that page. Perfect. Scan this now. So you've got an opportunity to be a part of this conversion audit giveaway.
Yep. Yeah, I got the giveaway. And then there's the CRO upgrade kit. We've got a bunch of resources in there. There's our one-click looker report, so you can see your intrasite funnel data. Both of these are going to be great resources for you. Lots that you can take away from not only today's content, but be able to run with by leveraging the upgrade kit for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks again. We appreciate your time and engagement.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Alrighty.